Counting sin's cost. List all the specific consequences that would result from immorality. The list will show you sin's potential devastation, and during times of temptation or weakness, read through the list. I'm going to show you a list that I put together when I'd just been married a very short time, and when I would travel certain places and speak or teach or whatever, I would take the list with me. And the question was this: what would happen if I ended up choosing the path of immorality? I was a young pastor by then. By then we had I think both of our daughters, and it might come out in one of these points. So maybe I was in my mid to late 20s when I put this list together. I think that's probably true. Dragging Christ's reputation in the mud. Having to one day look Jesus in the face of the judgment seat and explain why I did it. We'll talk about this with the law of reward or the principle of eternal rewards. The Bible actually does say we will stand and give an account of our lives. There is the judgment seat of Christ, and to be held accountable for that. This is why I did this. What reason on that day could have any merit whatsoever? Untold hurt to Nancy, my best friend and loyal wife. Loss of Nancy's respect and trust, that's what would happen. The possibility that I could lose my wife and my children forever, because some people have chosen the path of immorality, have destroyed their marriage and have never been forgiven by their spouse, and don't have access to their children, or at least not frequently, and they don't live in the same home with their children. Could this happen? Well, it's happened to lots of other people. Why could it not happen to me? Of course it could happen. So these are on my list. This is what could happen, my list of potential consequences. Hurt to and loss of credibility with my beloved daughters, Karina and Angie. Why listen to a man who betrayed Mom and us? Pondering that. I remember taking this list with me, and if I would I don't take this list with me anymore. I don't need to. It is so ingrained in my thinking that I am terrified and horrified at the idea of what could happen, and that causes, because as the years have gone on, 3 Christian leaders sat down together, and off the top of their heads, between the 3 of them, listed over 100 different men in ministry they knew. And probably almost every pastor could maybe not come up with that many, but could come up with an easy dozen of people that you went to seminary with, or were on staff with you, or churches in your neighborhood, in your area, or whatever. The number that I know, I try to forget the number that I know. So when I would see the faces of my kids in my mind's eye, the faces of my wife, the devastation, the wives that I know whose husbands have betrayed them. And again, of course, this isn't just men who do this. Women do it also, but I'm talking now as a man. The shame to my family. Why isn't Daddy a pastor anymore? The cruel comments of others who would invariably find out and would never forgive and would gossip and talk, and shame and hurt to my church and my friends. 40 years ago, we were starting that church. The devastation that I could have brought to our church and its reputation in our community. Those that I've led to Christ and discipled. I started thinking of the names of those that I've brought to Christ by God's grace and poured my life into, and what it would do to them, counting the cost. An irretrievable loss of years of witnessing to my unsaved father, who at age 85, many years after I wrote this list, came to faith in Christ after being the most antagonistic person toward the gospel that I've ever known, and then died at age 89. But he hated churches, and he hated pastors, and it really was hard for him to make an exception with me, but he loved me, but it was in spite of me being a pastor. And what it would have said to him, I turned out just like those pastors he thought were phonies, My dad was a tavern owner, so it's not like he had these great credentials, but nonetheless, it's like all those hypocrites. Bringing great pleasure to Satan, God's enemy, possibly contracting a sexually transmitted disease, passing on to Nancy, loss of self-respect, discrediting my own name, invoking shame and lifelong embarrassment upon myself. So because that was so negative, I want to end with something positive, and it's just a repeat. Preserve sound judgment and discernment. Do not let them out of your sight. They will be life for you and ornament to grace your neck. So all of these potential consequences, the whole idea of them is to scare you into count the cost. That's a biblical concept. You see it in Luke 14 and other passages. Before you go build this tower, count the cost. What's it going to cost? Well, count the cost of the choices you make, including count the cost of sin. And I talked to a man formerly in ministry who lost his marriage and his pastoral ministry as a result of his sexual sin. And I said, if you had it to do over again, what would have made a difference? What would have made a difference? And he said, what would have made the difference is if I had even begun to grasp how terrible the consequences would have been of me doing that thing I did that led to the other thing and the other thing and the other thing. If I would have had this, I think even the slightest idea, I think I would not have done it. I mean, even from a selfish point of view. And that's the smart and stupid part. But you don't have to live that way. They will be life for you, and then you will go your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. And when you lie down, you will not be afraid. And when you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Have no fear of sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked, for the Lord will be your confidence and keep your foot from being snared.